If you've ever gone into a full emotional breakdown and thought to yourself, this is it. This is me, I'm done. My guest today has a name for it. She calls it a shame storm. And we go deep into this. In this episode of Dysfunctional, I'm talking to Melinda Delisle. She's a clinical nutritionist, former childbirth educator, and someone who has lived through her own intense emotional dysregulation. We talk about the difference between feeling the normal dysregulation that many of us feel and feeling the overwhelming sense of shame. And we look at why some of the normal techniques, things like gratitude lists and mindfulness, can actually make us feel worse when we're in those states. We also talk about the role that nutrition plays in all of this. We also get into the uncomfortable bit, how when we are dysregulated, our own behavior could be perceived as toxic. So if you've ever felt like you are the sensitive one, or like you fall into those shame storms and shame spirals yourself, this episode's for you. Get comfortable because there's a lot to take in. Dysfunction is everywhere. In our families, in our cultures, and in our systems. And this is Dysfunctional, the podcast that helps you name the things that most people can or won't see. Let's call it out, break it down, and maybe even start a bloody revolution. So, Melinda, hello, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Great to be here, Josh.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm excited about this conversation, and I'll get into why I think as we go into the episode. But why don't I just give you a little opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, sure. I'm Melinda Delisle. I'm a clinical nutritionist, former childbirth educator, and business owner. And as I sometimes like to put on things, a human with very human emotions. I've had a
Mm,
long journey myself with dealing with emotional dysregulation and, figuring out how to just be able to be present, and not let my emotions get the better of me and instead feel like I can be calm. Um, I have also done some work in disaster areas, helping with infant and young child feeding in emergencies, and that's actually a significant part of what I've been working on now is spreading the word about that as well.
wow. Oh, okay. I'd like to get into that if we can.
Yeah,
Get into some of that.
yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. And how did you come into it? You know, when you say the nutrition,
hmm
like, were you doing stuff around emotions before nutrition? Like, was the nutrition, did you start doing nutrition because of that? Because the reason I framed the question that way is I've met some people who started as nutritionists and then realized, oh, this is linked to my emotions. And then I've met people who go to nutrition because they realize this is linked to their emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think for me it was actually, ironically, they were kind of disjointed for a while.
Hmm.
So I think I first started with, I'm going to say more the personal development side of things rather than emotional because, for me, that was the back door in. I actually took a Silva method training when I was 13 or 14. My dad decided to bring us to one of those workshops and practice that for a long time. So I was already into things like self-hypnosis type things and
At
relaxation
13.
techniques. A little bit.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I was pretty diligent practicing Silva method for a lot of years.
I've never
Um,
heard of that.
oh,
What is it?
so the Silva method, it was Jose Silva. It's basically, back then they called it the Silva method of like mind control because it was
Okay.
about controlling your own mind, controlling your own subconscious. But basically, it's really kind of a very systematic way of pursuing self-hypnosis so that you can utilize more of the benefits of our subconscious. Through Silva method practice, I used to be able to do things like go to bed and tell myself when I was going to wake up without setting an alarm. Get rid of
Wow.
headaches in a couple of minutes. Some of that kind of thing that I had gotten really good at. But that didn't really impact the fact that when I was in high school, I was what I now know was high functioning, extremely anxious.
Right.
um, and, would do things like cry when I got a new report or assignment, assigned from the teacher and, that kind of thing. I was not stable in a lot of ways, though people that wouldn't necessarily, I was one of those perfectionistic kids, one of those people that really irritate, I think, most students, because I was always high performing, always doing all the things, and somehow never thought I was good enough, and that's really, when I think about it, that was the first thing where the emotions started coming in, but I didn't know what to do with it at that point. I didn't even know that was a problem until one of my, I think it was junior year, English teachers told me, or had us all write one of those self-reflective assignments. This is one of those things that I know that every English teacher in the world is assigning these self-reflective papers because of what it did for me. They're hoping that this is what's going to happen. So basically, the assignment was write something, about yourself, your journey, your, mental state, whatever. I don't even remember exactly. But mine was called, "What do you mean I can't be perfect?" And it was just a reflection of realizing how, at least since middle school, I had this issue with thinking that if I got the 97%, on the test without studying, I was focused on the 3% I didn't do rather than the 97% I did. So that was really kind of the first clue that I had emotional issues. Didn't know anything about nutrition at that point. In college, I started learning a little bit about emotions. I went, again, because of the perfectionism thing, went to one of the counseling office, at college. They recommended, it's a very popular book, or was at the time. I can't exactly remember the name of it, like 10 Days to Self-Esteem or something like that. One of those, big smiling guy on the cover kind of things. It was all about cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. It helped, didn't solve everything, but that was kind of like my first entry into starting to work with the emotional side of things. Couple years later, I wound up meeting my ex, who was vegan and very into a lot of like natural health stuff at the time. And so I started learning more about the nutrition side of things. But I wasn't connecting it with emotions at all at that point. I was just looking at, oh, hey, cool. This natural health stuff is pretty neat. And I want to learn more about this because it seems like it's going to do a lot of things, for me, for a lot of people. Over the years, I'll take the nutrition path first because that's the faster and easier one. So on the nutrition path, over time, I was tweaking things for myself, taking that, at the time, what was called natural or holistic health, what we now call functional health, approach to, there's something going on. So there must be something wrong in my body, even though this isn't a diagnosable condition. Let me go figure out what that was. And I'm the kind of person that will go into all the research and try to sort it out. So that's kind of what I did. I would hear things, research things, figure it out, tweak stuff for myself. Over time, I did eventually find that a lot of those things had a really strong impact on my emotional state. So we could talk a bit more about that later because I don't want to get into the weeds on that. But I eventually found that was the case. Really, what eventually got me coming back around to nutrition was pregnancy, because of my history as a childbirth educator. And I had learned that nutrition made a huge difference in pregnancy complications. And I only came around to really focusing on the nutrition and emotional health interaction recently, which is pretty ironic.
Yeah.
So, on the emotional health path, I tried lots of things for years. Little intermittent things, unsuccessfully. I wasn't enormously emotionally dysregulated, but I definitely had some things that I did that were not great at that point in time, yelling at my kids too much, some of those kinds of overreacting, getting defensive to stuff I shouldn't have. Eventually there came a point where somebody I had been pretty close to and expected to be close to more or less didn't talk to me. for 3 weeks. And other than in like 1 to 3 word sentences for a couple of weeks, even though we were in the same house. And instead of blowing up about it, which was great, because I had been working on some things over time. I'd, tried a lot of the CBT, did some of the meditation things. Mindfulness was a total bust for me at that point in time, but we'll talk about that. And I said, something's wrong. This person shouldn't be that reserved in telling me anything. I need to change. And that's when I really, really sunk into it and was looking in the library and kind of very randomly found a book on EMDR, which for anybody who's not familiar, that's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a great thing that uses bilateral stimulation to help integrate both sides of the brain and trauma and things. Found a therapist through that I started working with, and that's kind of when my shifts really started to really both make improvements and in some ways make things worse, which I know sounds ironic, but sometimes when we really start looking at things, I think that we look at things, but circumstances in our life don't change. That makes things worse. And for me, at least, it did. It was my worst years of emotional dysregulation were actually after I had started healing, which might sound weird, but
no, I relate to that.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the not very short version.
So but that led you to the kind of the understanding of this stuff around the shame storms. There's a few things I want to ask you. Let's ask you about them. What were your experience? So CBT. So let me caveat this by saying just straight off the bat, if I don't like something or it doesn't work for me, I'm not suggesting that it's bad or that people shouldn't do it. If it works for people, I think it's great. They should keep doing whatever works for them and their experience. But I've always had a little bit of a difficulty with CBT in that it's become big over here in the UK in recent years. When I say recent years, I'm probably talking about the last decade now. Right. I think it's because it's very good at getting people like me to go, I feel crap, and then somebody says, let's do this stuff, and then measure how you feel after it. And I will always tell the person in front of me that I feel better because I want to please them. I kind of want it to work and I want them to feel better. So like the kind of whole like rescoring thing that happens with it, to me, makes it statistically seem like it's really good, but it feels very like heady to me. What was your experience with it?
Well, let me preface this by saying, one of the really big belief systems I live by is that the same things aren't going to work for everybody. And something that works at one time may not work later. Okay. Or something that didn't work at one point may work later on. Okay. So I've had times where CBT was very helpful for me, and I've had times where CBT just like was more or less ineffectual at best. So back when I was in college and I started doing a little bit of the CBT, I was still at that point pretending I didn't have emotions for the most part. It was very stuffed. And so that ability to kind of work a little bit on kind of the belief systems was all right. I wasn't doing it under anybody's guidance. I was doing it myself. And I think that makes a difference.
Yeah.
Because when it was just me, I could decide, well, this isn't helping. And go do something else. Or, I can be a little bit more honest, about how I'm really feeling before and after, versus trying to tell somebody else, and yes, that, especially for those of us that have been, people pleasers, recovering people pleaser as well as recovering perfectionist, here. Yeah, that drive to make somebody else see the progress so that you can earn their approval is real.
Yeah.
It's real, it's palpable. And I would say probably the biggest benefit I got out of CBT and the times that I have used it, because I have used it off and on, in little
Yeah.
bits, is the identifying that the thought that I'm having that is making me feel a certain way is not necessarily true.
Yeah.
That one piece is huge. For me, I wound up using kind of a variant of that and something else later on in a technique I kind of adapted from a few other places that I call translations. Basically that thing of like, what else could this mean? If I'm driving down the road and somebody cuts me off in traffic, if I'm in one of my fragile or triggered states, I might have gotten like really angry at this person, be like, oh, what an a-hole, what a, just whatever, they're being a fucking jerk. Why? Because I might be thinking they're doing that to piss me off. They're doing that because they don't care. They're doing that. I have all these reasons, all these meanings that I've attached to their behavior. When I would stop and ask myself, okay, what else might be going on? Oh, maybe they're late and this is their last, chance before they get fired. Maybe they're rushing somebody to the hospital. None of those things might be true, but just the fact that they might be true took a lot of the wind out of the, oh, this is being done to me.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that was one of those uses of the CBT, and kind of like a variant of it, that I wound up really, that retraining my mindset, helping myself to look at things a little bit differently over time has been one of the biggest things that's helped me.
Yeah, using it in the moment like that, I guess is very beneficial, isn't it? Because like the way that you've just described it, I mean, even if the other reasons that you come up with aren't why they are like they are, they're almost certainly more likely the reason that some random person's cut you up on the road, right? It's more likely something to do with them than it is that they're disrespecting you or think less of you, right? But or I certainly have a tendency to think straight away they're doing it because they disrespect me. So I guess when you frame it like that, I use it very regularly still now. And I suppose it's an in then in a way as well, isn't it? It's an into some of this deeper reflections that we need to do. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I've really found it honestly pretty essential at times, because I don't know if you find this is getting a little bit into some of the shame stuff and the triggers and things. When I've been in a more fragile space, or especially if I'm already triggered, okay, because there were a lot of years that I was walking around in a triggered, basically fight or flight, high stress, emotionally reactive state and didn't even know it.
Mm.
Okay. And one of the things I've learned over time is that when I'm in that state, I do not see the world the way that I do when I'm not.
Yeah.
I literally look at things as I'm looking for the threat. I'm looking for the reason that someone else is attacking. I might be messing up. I'm going to find them too. I'm going to find all the reasons that I'm messing up, all the reasons people are attacking me. And so that translations practice, there have been times in the past where, like, I was invited to go, this was something back, when I was with my ex. He had asked me to go to the park and help him plan a scavenger hunt. Okay. And for some reason, I was seeing that as he wasn't respecting my time. Why was he making me do this? Blah, 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 blah. Until I stopped and thought, it's like, okay, what are some other reasons? Maybe he values my input. Maybe he actually wants to spend time with me. Maybe he thinks it's great to have a second pair of eyes and wants me to have a more intimate understanding of the location before I go ahead and build the thing. When I was looking at that, all of a sudden this became something that was positive instead of something that was like attacking or negative.
Mm.
And yeah, it's for somebody who's like where I was, where I was mostly seeing the world through that filter of what's wrong and what's going to happen. Practicing that regularly was enormous. It was such a big shift.
Mm. Yeah, I've realized that, especially what you're saying about like walking about in that kind of hypervigilant state. I got sober in 2012, and I always say that I didn't realize how much I was still in that state for a number of years, until a number of years after, looking back retrospectively, and I was like, wow, I really thought that I was in a good place as well, but I was actually still very much acting from that place of like threat, and especially, by the way, in personal relationships. And I don't just mean romantic, I mean like friendships as well. I was waiting for you to trip up so that I could go see you're not to be trusted. And I can probably still be like that a little bit today, actually, and it can leave you feeling a little bit lonely, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about these. Let's talk about, because I've mentioned it a couple of times. I really resonated with this shame storm that you talked about, right? And I read one of your Substacks. It was Leona sent me one of the Substacks, and she obviously knew that it was going to resonate with me because she knows me well. But this idea of the difference between like a shame spiral, shame storm, and a lot of what people say dysregulated now. So like everything, right? I think these terms blow up, and being dysregulated has blown up now, right? I even, my 19-year-old daughter, she won't be listening to this, so I don't have to worry about it. But she'll say she's overstimulated now when I'm in her way, And so like sometimes this terminology, which is really good and useful, gets taken and then like used, and it can almost diminish the proper experience. Now, the proper experience of a shame storm, to use your words. Can you just share what you mean when you say it?
Yeah, I'm happy to, because shame storm is a term I actually think my ex might have coined it. It's much different than like people talk about shame spirals, shame swamps. To me, they're kind of three different things, really.
Okay.
Shame swamp to me is kind of like if I'm stuck in that feeling of shame and I'm having a hard time getting out, but it's kind of like it's there, it's impacting the way I function, but it's not all-encompassing. I don't know if that makes sense. It's like you know how it's like walking through a swamp or mucky sand or something like that. Is like it's hard to move,
Yeah.
and it might go on stretch forever, but you can still move, A shame spiral to me is if I'm in one of those places where I'm being self-critical and I keep being more and more self-critical, and it's just feeding itself. That's more the shame spiral. A shame storm, to give a metaphor, feels an awful lot like being stuck in the middle of a maelstrom on a rowboat without oars, where there's a complete lack of control. There's a complete inability to see anything beyond the shame or the dysregulated emotions. And a feeling of powerlessness to get out of it. And it's like it kind of takes over everything. Now, I could say that fortunately I have not had a shame storm for a very long time. This seems to be something they had started getting farther and farther apart as I worked on things, and now I'm at the point where I don't, at least for the last year and a half-ish, I haven't really had shame storms. I'll get like shame swamps or spirals sometimes, but that shame storm, that feeling Another metaphor might be like, a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum where they just like can't get it under control, which honestly probably more what it is one of those younger dysregulated parts of self that's just like never learned how to work with the big emotions, and therefore it just feels huge and powerful, and like you can't fight it. For me, because I'm a more internally focused person, I'm less of a blamer and more of a self-shamer. There is also a lot of self-worth issues and things that come up in the shame storms. And it's almost like I keep in the shame storms. I want to make myself feel as bad as possible.
Yeah.
And it's not even like, sometimes when we get blamed or we get into shame, it's like we'll feel it, but we feel like somehow it's not fair. When I'm in a true shame storm, I feel like it's like it totally is what it is.
Wow.
And that's just the truth. And the truth is that I'm a horrible, awful person who can't do anything right and shouldn't even be here. And yeah, there was a period of about a year and a half where I'd say probably about when the shame storms were the worst, where my suicidal ideation was also the worst.
Yeah. What do you think drives that then? What's like, I nearly said what creates the perfect storm,
which is the good way to ask the question.
I mean, I almost accidentally said it and then pulled out and thought, I don't think you can say that. But
you can say anything you want, Josh.
No, yeah. But do you think, let me break the question down a little bit. Do you think that, do you think there's life experiences that can cause this? And 2, do you think you have to be a certain type of person for it to happen to you?
So the first part, I think I've thought about quite a bit. I do think that they are much more likely with people who've experienced some kind of trauma, probably particularly more in that complex PTSD side of things, something that's been ongoing. You don't generally find, I do talk to people a fair amount one-on-one, and get into conversations about a lot of this kind of thing. And it's very telling to see how someone responds to the term shame storm. When I do bring it up, you can tell the people that are just like, oh, you understand me.
Yeah.
And then there's the ones that like their eyes go wide and they just kind of like freeze up, like, you're talking about what? Is that something that happens to people? And it's a very, isolating type of experience. It's an othering kind of thing. But to come back to the other part of the question, are there certain types of people? I do think that probably, I've only thought about this a little bit, and definitely am not an expert, but I think people who tend to be a little bit more sensitive, people who are more likely to want to please others, not that there aren't other ways of trauma manifesting, than people pleasing, there are. Possibly people that, are going through stress. I will say stress does seem to increase it. Ironically, there's a biochemical influence as well. The closest I've come to a shame storm recently, it was a little more of a shame spiral, but the closest I've come recently was actually right after I had changed up what I was doing with my supplements. Ooh, and I know that's going to sound a little bit crazy, but remember that everything in our body is interrelated. Our neurotransmitters that help with, emotional regulation and how we're feeling are they're created by what we eat. They're metabolized and gotten rid of by different systems and processes in the body. And if we throw that off, it's going to throw off that system. And it was the weirdest thing, because even though I know this, Okay. You know how it happens. You know something, but then doing it is something else entirely.
Yeah.
And I had this, I'm a nutritionist. I have lots of stuff lying around. So I have this one multivitamin that is like, seems to be great, perfect for me. I had another bottle of like B complex vitamins that was getting near its expiration date, and I hate throwing things away. So I was like, okay, I'll go ahead and use this up. I'll just alternate it with my multivitamin so I'm not getting too much in any day, and this should be fine. I've used this thing in the past. All should be good, right? No. The first day I took it, I was kind of like not great mood, but not horrible. Okay, next day I was doing fine. Again, I was alternating. So third day, taking that B complex again, I get to where in the afternoon I'm in this horrible mood. I can't get myself to do anything. I'm starting to talk again about, oh, I shouldn't be here. Maybe I should have just given up, just not talk to anybody, go hide away, doing things. And I started getting into a little bit of that, like, I don't deserve to live thing again. And when I did that, fortunately, I've worked enough on myself. I went, what is going on? Now, I couldn't break out of it at that moment because I was in it enough that it was in that space of like, I didn't really want to feel differently. I did, but I
Yeah.
didn't. So it wasn't until a lot later, I had already finally gotten myself to go to bed because I was like, something's different. What's different? What's different? What's different? That it finally occurred to me, I changed my vitamins. So I went and immediately took those B complex. I looked first of all at the bottle. I was like, okay, how different are these? Sure enough, B vitamin levels were very, very different. Much higher in the B complex than in my usual multi. Went ahead and took all of those B complexes out of my little, I usually do a weekly pill minder thing. Next day I was better. Within 48 hours, I was totally fine again.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a big thing as a nutritionist. I have this is one of my like things I really like to emphasize to people because people think that it doesn't have an impact. Okay. The methylation pathway in the liver, I'm talking biochemistry here, sorry. It's one of those things that it's what processes serotonin, dopamine, things like that, and gets them metabolized to move out of the body. Okay.
Wow.
Having too much serotonin or too little serotonin will put us into depression or a bad mood.
Wow.
And when we change the level of nutrients we're giving the liver to work with, it changes how fast it metabolizes things. This is especially important for anybody who's on an SSRI or other kinds of depression medications because it can totally change how the body metabolizes it to the point where it will stop working.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's not that people shouldn't make those changes. They just need to do it with advice of somebody who knows what they're doing. Because a lot of us who have issues with emotional dysregulation actually need much higher doses of some of these B vitamins than most people do. But you can't just jump to that. Especially if someone's already taking medications. So yeah, it's a big thing. I'm going to admit that I messed up. I'm actually in the process of writing a Substack on this exact topic, B vitamins and emotional dysregulation, because it's a big thing. If our biochemistry isn't right, especially for me, if my biochemistry is off, my emotions are going to be off. They don't get as off as they used to, but it still makes a difference. And back when I was, regularly in shame storms, having my blood sugar be off, having eaten something I'm allergic to or sensitive to, not having gotten enough sleep for a few nights in a row. Any of those things could be the thing that tipped me from fragile and being able to manage into easily triggered and totally in a full-blown shame storm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this sensitivity to food is such a big thing that I don't know what it's like over your side of the pond, but here there's no, like, you don't have any like mainstream, whatever I mean by that, mainstream people talking about the links between emotional dysregulation and the things that we eat. There's just nobody links the two.
It's it's one of those things I find a little confusing because in the functional health space, the functional integrative health space, it's well known. We talk about this all the time. But when you get outside of that, most people aren't talking about it. And
No.
really, I feel like personally, I was not able to get a handle on my shame storms, and really being able to just be calmer and steadier and more regulated most of the time until I worked out my biochemistry and a lot of the belief systems and had those recovery techniques and ways to help myself stay in a better place to begin with, and started getting in integrity with myself, and
Yeah.
my actual needs, wants, desires matching my external world better.
Yeah. So where would you say to people to start? If the people that are listening to this, right, and they think, okay, I am probably somebody that falls into the shame storms, right? And if I just try and bring my own personal experience to help the listener, maybe I feel like I went through earlier in the year, I went through some like dramatic, like life changes. And I feel like, based on what you've said, I feel like there were moments when I probably was teetering on being in into a storm.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm reflecting, I would probably say, based on like what I was experiencing, it almost sort of made sense that I was. But if I look back a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I would say that I was regularly falling into those storms. For me, by the way, it would come out as I would be very, very internally hateful to myself and externally incapable of being there with my children in any capacity.
Yeah.
So if people are listening and they feel like they're, teetering on storms or even regularly in storms, where should they start? What should they do?
There's a couple of things to do to start with. One of the first things is to just start trying to be aware,
Mm.
and awareness has a few elements. One is going to be aware of whether or not you're in a storm, a shame storm.
Mm-hmm.
What are you actually feeling? If we don't know what we're feeling, we can't work with what we're feeling, and for some of us that's hard. Okay.
Yeah.
There was a long time and still sometimes I will suppress emotions enough to be like, oh yeah, I'm fine. It's like, no, I'm not fine. Not if I look deeper. But if you feel like you don't know how you're feeling, okay, start with what are body sensations? So many of us get pulled up into our heads,
Mm.
especially if right, maybe I shouldn't generalize this. I should just talk about what I do. If I really don't want to be feeling something, now, I am the kind of person, I will dive into all the emotions. I understand the value of that. I understand the value of expressing it in the times and places I choose to, rather than it choosing. Okay, but if I'm not wanting to look at that, I'm going to stuff it, and then I have a hard time knowing what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
So sometimes just coming back to, okay, what is my body feeling? Am I breathing fast or slow? Is how are my shoulders feeling? Are they tense, or are they relaxed? Just some of those body sensations, even things like, okay, let me pay attention to what it feels like to wiggle my toes. This is not meant to be that mindfulness thing, because I found if you're in a shame storm or going into one, mindfulness is not going to work. Okay. But it's more just trying to figure out what's going on. So that we're practicing being able to figure out, how am I feeling?
Mm.
Okay. Another part of the awareness is to figure out, where am I on that scale of capacity for dealing with stuff, that scale of resilience.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while, but I eventually was able to tell, it's like, okay, am I in a good solid space, emotional state, that I can have a challenging conversation? Or if I go ahead and open this challenging conversation now, am I in one of those fragile places where it is going to flip my trigger and I'm going to be, dysregulated or into a full-on shame storm?
Mm.
you know and strangely enough, sometimes I didn't even know, because there's shame storm and then there's those shame swamps.
Mm.
Knowing whether or not you're already in something, it's like, oh yeah, if I'm really listening to what I'm saying to myself, if I'm noticing how my body's feeling, if I'm doing all of these things, I'm actually already in a thing,
Yeah.
and I need to go ahead and get out of that. So that's one of the first places, as far as like building that awareness, getting into the moment. It takes time, it takes guidance, but we can do it.
Yeah.
We all have that capacity. I do have a program that I'm developing that is designed to kind of help people with that awareness step, for at least the first month, get people on that good road. Um, Another one that takes a little bit longer, but I think is really essential, especially for those of us that have this shame aspect and the negative self-worth and all of that, is self-parenting.
Mm.
It's, at least for me and a lot of the people I work with, one of the reasons we're in those shame storms and that dysregulation is because there's a wounded part of self that doesn't believe that things are okay.
Mm.
And that wounded part of self is sometimes the one that's actually in that fight or flight, hypervigilance, whatever, all the time. And it will get anxious at different points and come out and take over.
Mm.
Does that mean that we're like multiple personalities or anything like that? That's not what I mean. This is something that happens with almost everybody, to some extent or another. But helping teach those wounded parts of self that they are loved and accepted, that they are genuinely okay just as they are, even
Mm.
when they're mad, even when they're upset, even when they're angry, even when they make a mistake.
Mm.
That a mistake isn't the end of the world. And developing that trust within ourselves and inside of ourselves, that starts building more of that resilience,
Mm.
and gives us better tools for being able to calm down the parts of self that are acting up, when we get into those dysregulated states or shame storms, whatever you want to call
Mm.
them.
Mm. Mm. So you, once you get the awareness, that piece that you're talking about, that kind of reparenting piece,
Mm-hmm.
that was so huge for me, I think, because that learning to love myself in those moments
Yeah.
was like life changing, because I think what people do is they fall into them states and then feel like in order to love themselves again, they've got to work themselves out of that state.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a big piece around that, right? And do you think that's driven by the fact that we go into it, we're in a childlike state when it's happening?
I think possibly. I mean, have had very similar experience
Mm.
in that, those child states were so distrusting, so feeling like there was something wrong with me,
Mm.
that if I took what a lot of people would think is like the typical approach to getting oneself out of that, it's like, what do we tend to do? Oh, buck up, quiet down, don't worry about it. A lot of times we'll do the placating.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's okay. Oh, don't worry about it. Oh, 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 oh. All of those things are invalidating.
Mm.
When I was in a shame storm, I was hypersensitive to invalidation.
Mm.
Not because it felt like it was disrespecting me or something like that, but because it made me feel like I was wrong
Mm.
or bad just for feeling that way.
Mm.
And it sounds like this was a little bit similar to you, but learning, one of the key things that helped me come out of those states when I would get into them was learning to, one, figure out where I was at. It's like, okay, yes, I'm in this thing. What am I feeling?
Mm.
I'm feeling sad, ashamed, angry, whatever it was, and just acknowledging that. And literally saying out loud to myself most of the time, it's okay that I feel whatever it was.
Mm.
Even if it's something, oh, I hate so and so, it's like, it's okay that I feel that way.
Yeah.
It's okay, that unconditional self-acceptance, instead of what I would tend to do before I learned all of these techniques. I hate calling them techniques, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
which was to be like, oh, why are you feeling that way? This isn't that bad. What's wrong with you? Why can't you settle down? Why isn't gratitude working? Why isn't mindfulness working? All of those kinds of things that just made me feel worse and then made me even more stuck in those
Yeah.
states.
Why do you think they get pushed so much, those techniques? Like, because I hear you. I mean, you raised the gratitude as well. The amount of times I've been in, at least verging on a shame storm, and I've been told things like do calm breathing or write a gratitude list. Like, there's quite an issue really with being told to do those things in those moments, isn't there?
There is, and I think part of it is because for people who are only in a mild state of dysregulation, I'll put that in
Mm-hmm.
quotes, those things do work.
Mm.
If somebody's like, oh, I'm feeling a little squidgy about what's going on, they can get themselves, do any of those things. Oh, let me look around the room and, see 5 things, hear 4 things, whatever it is. Let me just
Yeah.
ground myself into the room, or trace my finger, or think about the things I'm grateful for. If they're only off this much and their default state is to be settled, then that little bit can bring them back.
Yeah.
For those of us that have been in the deep shame, like I'm talking the deep shame, where
Yeah.
somewhere something in our core feels like the world would be better off without us.
Mm.
That thing is not enough,
Mm.
because we're already flipped into that fight or flight state. We're already flipped into that threat. And through that filter, it's like, come on, let's think about it. Let's think about it in a very realistic way. You're walking through the woods, you see a bear. Are you going to stop and admire the sunset behind it?
No. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Oh, I'm afraid there might be a bear there. Oh, wow, look at the sunset. When you think about it that way, it seems insane. Of course we're
Yeah.
not going to, because then you might die.
Yeah.
Like literally, you might die if you go ahead and think about gratitude while there's a threat like a bear.
Yeah.
But those people where they're just like, they're not in bear threat, they're not in survival state, they can do that. Those of us that are in survival state, we can't. The bear might not exist. The bear might only have been there when we were 2 years old.
Mm.
But to our system, it's still real.
Yeah.
And because we're looking for that threat, and sometimes it's worse if you can't see the threat.
Yeah.
We're just always constantly looking because we know there must be a threat. So where is it?
Yeah.
And people tell us, well, this should work. It should be fine. This is what works for everybody. Go ahead and rub the tips of your fingertips together with exquisite precision and really be aware of it. It's like, okay, great. If my body is thinking I need to run from a bear, that's not going to work. And then my self-shaming thinking patterns are going to wonder what the hell is wrong with me.
Yeah, why? Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it makes me worse. Yeah,
Yeah, it's so
yeah,
it's like, yes, that just proves the fact that there's something wrong with me at my core and it's not repairable.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that is one of the worst things you can do to somebody that's in one of these states
mm,
of
yeah.
mind. It's
So once you've got the awareness then, and you've done some of that reparenting, is it literally, is that the essence of what we're talking about here, or
yes
is
and
there
no. I mean, sorry, I shouldn't have
no
jumped
no
in
no
right
no no no
there.
no no I think you knew where I was going, right? Like, is there any more? Is there anything else that we can be doing in those moments, like, I don't know, practically, that you feel can really help us?
There are a lot of things. I will say that really honestly, I think I actually listed them out at one point in time. I've tried somewhere around like 4 dozen different techniques
Hmm.
to try to get things fixed and get myself to a more stable emotional state. There are a lot of things that can work. Okay.
Hmm.
I think when it comes to the actual dysregulation pattern itself, that creating a sense of safety, being aware, creating a sense of safety, which for me was first thing I had to do when I realized I was in a shame storm was go and get somewhere by myself.
Yeah.
Because to me, because of that hypervigilance and everything, having anybody around me was not going to work.
Hmm.
Unless they were like literally responding with the perfect, empathetic, validating, whatever response, I was going to see a problem.
Yeah.
And even just needing somebody to be around me made me worse because that was, again, more proof that I was horrible. That's not the case for everybody, but for me, it was go by myself.
Mm.
That was step one of kind of like getting away from the triggers, getting somewhere where I could start having a little bit of safety. You know, Within that, sometimes I would need and benefit from using things like a weighted blanket or even just like a heavy quilt. Or I had actually a little nook that I had built myself in my closet, where I would like tuck myself back into. So I had this like
Mm.
feeling of a bit of pressure around. Um, Expressing how I was feeling. There were times where, okay, safety was I'd go lock myself in the bathroom, and expressing the emotion is really important to kind of like move those chemicals through. Research says that the actual chemical aspect of an emotion only lasts like 90 seconds.
Wow. Okay.
And that anything beyond that is more based on like our thinking pattern. I think there's nuances to that the
Yeah.
research hasn't caught up with yet, because I've definitely had emotions go on for a whole lot longer than 90 seconds when I wasn't even thinking of anything, let alone, things that
Yeah.
would be building that emotion. But moving the emotion through is really huge. We can't
Mm.
all do things like scream or yell or hit pillows or, run away or whatever it is that our body wants to do. So we need to find something. If we can do some kind of expression that's quiet, that's not going to freak out the other people we're living with or the animals we're living with, because that's a danger. It is a
Mm.
danger. Sometimes it was things like I'd literally take the toilet paper roll and tear it into little pieces,
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
because it's an expression. It's something that I could do to get that energy out. And yeah, and then some of that coaching oneself through it. This is part of where the self-parenting winds up being both a long-term benefit and an in-the-moment benefit, because I
Mm.
found that the practice of doing the self-parenting, I'm not sure which style you did. I literally did the like John K. Pollard Yellow Book
Yeah. Yeah.
self-parenting for a while, eventually got beyond the, ask only these questions thing and don't talk back, because I do talk back now when I do self-parenting. But learning that those ways of being validating
Yeah.
to inner child during the self-parenting sessions helped a lot when I was in one of those dysregulated states or a shame storm, because I could be like, why are you feeling this way? Talking to myself, whatever it is, part of self, blah, 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 I hate so-and-so, I do this, whatever it is. Great, thanks for telling me that.
Yeah.
Didn't have to argue with it. Didn't have to just acknowledging that, yeah, that's a thing. I don't want to
Mm.
tell those things to the person that I'm feeling that way about, because I know when I come out of that shame storm or that dysregulation, I'm not going to feel that way anymore,
Yeah.
you know? So that's part of it as well. And then as far as like the healing on the day-to-day level, there are so many things, getting the trauma moved out of the body,
Yeah.
because our body does like to store it. As we talked a little bit about before, rewiring our thinking patterns,
Mm.
helping us learn to see things a little bit differently and calm it all down.
Yeah. 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 And do you think that's like a lot of that stuff? What I'm hearing, tell me if I'm wrong, is like individual. So like you say, when you're in that storm, you need to go and be on your own.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely there might be a small handful of people that I might be able to be around that could actually help me regulate, but
Yeah.
a lot of it is on my own. Like, do you think there might be some people for whom they need to be around people? And
Yes.
like when they're in that, so it's about actually. That's why I guess the awareness piece becomes so important, because it's like, know where you are, like really. And I'm just trying to reflect back what I've heard from you, which is like, become intentional and rooted in that understanding of where I am, and then feel empowered really to like parent yourself into finding whatever it is that you need in their moments, and then being able to love yourself enough to give yourself those things, rather than just lay there thinking I shouldn't be here anymore. It's which is what would happen when I'm in it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh, it absolutely makes sense, because I've talked with some people, about getting out of dysregulation or self-parenting and things. And yeah, what they need is to go be around friends,
Yeah.
and I think it's about that sense of safety,
Mm.
and especially emotional safety, but I mean, obviously physical safety to begin with, but emotional safety as well. And if somebody has at least some healthy relationships where they feel truly safe and truly accepted in those relationships, absolutely those people, I honestly think probably that helps people faster.
Yeah.
But a lot of us, at least I, did not feel like I had anyone that was able to respond in that kind of healthy way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that may have not been true. Okay. This again, remember my mindset filtering hypervigilance, looking for the threat. That may not have been true. There may have been people who would have been just fine, but my perception was that I didn't.
Yeah.
And because my perception was that I didn't, the only thing that worked for me was to be somewhere alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eventually that did change a little bit. Some of it for me was also just that I didn't want to burden anybody. So even if there were people that would have been just fine, I probably wouldn't have wanted to talk with them anyway.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it
Or
is
would
individual.
yeah, and I think that our level of sensitivity plays a big role in that, right? Because I consider myself like highly sensitive person, yeah, and so I think that if I was less sensitive, there would be a bigger pool of people that I could feel emotionally safe around. But
Yeah.
because I'm so highly sensitive, it's harder to find people that I can't, like you say, a lot of it is probably a me thing where I've taken my sensitivity and then I'll see the way that somebody looks at me, and then that's enough I can't be myself around them because I'm too in tune with that. And then so it just becomes easier for me to be on my own. And that's why I say there's a small handful of people I think that can really come in and, regulate. And I mean, I wonder, I'm going a little bit off on a tangent here, but I do wonder if that, for so much of my life, I mistook familiarity for being safety. Like, if my body was around something that felt familiar, I thought that was safety because I knew how to I knew how to act, how to mask, how to actively be okay in that space. And it's only been very recently in my life that I've started to realize that the familiarity that I was mistaking for safety had actually almost become part of my problem because it wasn't safe. It was preventing me from safety. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think that's very, very true. Is, how can we know anything but what's familiar?
Yeah.
We have to expose ourselves to other kinds of experiences in order for us to be able to evaluate previous experiences differently.
Yeah.
And I also love how you say you thought it was safe, because I think that's what happens is we think that it's safe because we know how to act. We know how to make ourselves be okay.
Yeah.
And not be, harmed physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever, in whatever situation. But I think something in us, whether you want to say it's the subconscious, our body, our soul, whatever, I don't know. We don't know yet. Something in us though knows it's not.
Mm.
And that, I think, is part of where that emotional dysregulation can come from. Some people's bodies will actually get sick when they're in a space that's not safe, but they continue to stay there anyway.
Mm.
And something in us knows, and it's going to keep screaming louder. Now that doesn't negate the impact of, the biochemical things, hormones, all that other kind of stuff that plays a role in it. But even with all those things being fine, if we're in somewhere that's not really right for us, and that might not necessarily mean that there's actually a problem with the situation. You know what I mean? It might not be that somebody's not safe. It just might not be what meets our needs and desires.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So like when I look at my own life journey, I would say in my real like young adulthood, familiarity really was unsafe, right? So it really meant that I thought I was safe around people that really were emotionally unsafe. But then I think I progressed into a phase where I wasn't surrounding myself with bad, unsafe, emotionally unsafe people. They just weren't my people.
Yeah.
They were just the people that I found the easiest to self-organize around. So it felt like the least amount of effort. And I thought that was safety. Until I, continued to do more work on myself and then realized and had more experiences of emotional safety with other human beings. And again, because of my level of sensitivity, and I don't mean it to sound arrogant, because actually I think if I could choose to be another way, I probably would. But it just means that the number of people on this planet that make me feel emotionally safe just is quite a lot smaller than perhaps the average person, whatever that means,
Yeah. I think that's probably true for everybody who's developed a certain amount of awareness of our own needs. But I also do think that when we do have that awareness and we've done a certain amount of healing, we can be around people who aren't emotionally safe, and we know what our capacity is for that.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things is, as I've healed, yes, I did the same kind of thing. It's like I was in situations where maybe I thought it was safe, maybe I didn't, or maybe it wasn't actually. For me, it was more thinking there were things I was supposed to be doing that wasn't really in line with like my deepest desires, and that continued friction wound up causing a problem, you know. But as I've healed, I can, at least at times, depending on my level of awareness, level of stress, whatever, deal with things that used to trigger me.
Yeah.
Whereas now they don't.
Yeah.
I've got a greater capacity to be able to be around someone else's negative or out of control emotions.
Yeah.
Whereas for a long time I couldn't handle any of it. I was just like, okay, somebody like looked at me crosswise. I'm out of here. I can't deal. If I even was that present, sometimes it would be, oh, somebody looked at me crosswise, poof, shame storm.
Yeah.
And that's not a good way to live.
No, no, no. But I think that awareness piece again, like, and to bring everything that we sort of said full circle a little bit, the awareness piece just becomes so important, because I think when I was around people that weren't my people, and not necessarily bad people, it's almost like when there are like the people that really aren't safe, and you can see in the cold light of day that they're not, like, that's hard to navigate. But I think it's harder to navigate when you're around people that are just not your people, and so you can't feel safe. Because when you're not aware of that, you just feel like there's something wrong with you. Because it's like, I can be with these people, they think I'm all right, but I don't feel myself. I don't feel like I can be what I'm supposed to be, and that's almost like takes a bit more awareness, I think, because it's, we talked about it already, but it's like going on in the subconscious a little bit, so it's like it's like this deeper, harder to find thing. And so that, once you do find it, then I can now be around people that are not my people and just be like, oh, I'm noticing that I'm reacting a little bit here. That's okay, because these aren't my people, and that's totally okay. That doesn't mean that I'm a horrible person. It just means I can't be around these people,
Yeah, and I think I think you're right, that one is harder. I'm still learning this one.
Same,
I'm sure this is true for pretty much everybody, but I've got a lot of diverse aspects of self. And I've got the people that I know who are healthcare practitioners or childbirth professionals or business owners, or I also do a lot of gaming and social deception games. I do nerdy things like dress up in cosplay and go to Dragon Con. I've got, the spiritual aspect of myself. And there's a lot of times that I still feel like I have to hide parts of myself depending on where I'm showing up. And sometimes that's true, and I'm going into that knowingly and being there, for a certain amount of time, knowing, yep, I am not going to show up in the cosplay thing when I'm going to XYZ networking event, and there are other times where it's less obvious. And it's just like, can I be myself here? Can I be the maybe a little bit fiery, loud, passion-driven, sometimes over the top me here? Or do I need to keep a rein on that?
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe sometimes like that is the agency, right? It's not like it's not this idea that I've just got to radically be myself, whoever I want to be, wherever I am. I think true agency is like, okay, I can lean into being this slight version of myself when I'm here, because that's what makes me feel safe, and I feel like I'm giving away a little bit of myself to do that, but I'm aware of it, so it's okay. And I'm cool with it. I feel like maybe that is true agency, rather than just kind of the polarized idea that I'm gonna be exactly who I am wherever I am,
Yeah, well, I mean, life is a little bit about give and take, right?
Yeah.
We can't, if all of us were 100% of ourselves, getting 100% of our desires met at all times, it wouldn't work. We can't just do 100% of what we want and are all the time. Because there are places that's not appropriate. There are people we care about where, well, if we do care about them, we need to give back to them sometimes too.
Yeah.
So yeah, being able to make those decisions. I do think it's essential to have places where we can bring our whole selves.
Yeah.
Even if bringing our whole selves mean, yes, I know I'm withholding this part of me right now because of this, and I know you know that. Because that alone is relieving, to be seen that way, to be really authentically seen and known, to the point where even when you're not bringing all of who you are, that the people you're with value that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that place where you should be able to find that, at least one of them places should be home. And I think I lived a life for a long, long time where, as a child and into my adulthood, where I didn't have that home. I didn't have anywhere where I fully got to be myself. And I think everybody needs and deserves that. And I think that a lot of people live without it, and maybe go their whole lives living without it, which is a shame, really.
It is a shame, and I do think everybody deserves it. And actually, that's part of why I've shifted so much into working with emotional health and trying to help people be more resilient and regulated. Is I think a lot of us kind of go in full circle. I think a lot of us, if we do live in that fight or flight survival state, we do tend towards emotional dysregulation. It's hard for us to let the people around us be themselves because we can't deal. And just thinking back, okay, hopefully my son won't hate me for this, but when my son was young, we're talking like 2 years old, okay? I was not an emotionally safe person at that point in time. I mean, I distinctly remember a day he was wandering around with one of those little sippy cups, that's a toddler cup with a lid on it, whatever, had water in it. Water, right? He's running around doing toddler things, drops it, it opens up, spills water all over the carpet. From my perspective now, this is not a big deal. It's water. It's on the carpet. Then I flipped my lid. Absolutely flipped my lid. So what did that create in him? Toxic behavior. I was exhibiting toxic behavior. He didn't have a sense of safety. He felt like he couldn't make mistakes. All of that was because of my inability to regulate myself. And this is one of those things where I sometimes get frustrated with a lot of the whole, just, get rid of everybody in your life who's toxic culture. There are those of us on the other side, where we're doing stuff, and sometimes we're aware we're doing stuff and we just don't know what to do about it, and so that doesn't mean that those people should get a pass. Okay. I shouldn't have had a pass. I've created some pretty bad situations that probably injured people, that I care about. And there are ways to work on it. It took time. That behavior wasn't acceptable. Behavior is different than the person. And it's such an important concept. And I feel like with this whole get rid of the toxic people, it's not acknowledging that we actually can do something about those behaviors if we want to work at it.
Yeah. And it, that comes down to accountability and stuff in the end, right? I feel like we could carry on. But I actually have a hard stop today, which is a bit of a shame because I feel like we could have gone off on a few more tangents. But listen, before I close this down, I want to say thank you. I think that like I had some big realizations there. I think particularly around the whole safety piece and finding the people that I can feel safe around, particularly in the sort of shame storm moments. So I'm very grateful to you, and it's the conversation I knew it would be. Is there anything you want to say? Any parting comments you want to leave the listener with? Any like ways they can work with you or reach out to you that you want to share with us? Now's the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely I want to express my appreciation for having me on. It's been a great conversation, and you always have the real, authentic conversations, which I value so much.
Thank you.
I would encourage anybody who wants to continue this conversation or exploration, to come and sign up for my Substack. It's just Melinda Delisle, MELINDADELIS, as in Sam, LE.substack.com. I'm getting started with getting things up weekly again. I had been pretty regular, dropped off for personal reasons, but it's coming back to about every week. And yeah, you can watch that space for the programs I'm going to be offering. Like I said, that 4-week free program that's going to be supporting learning the awareness, learning how to have some conversations with people we care about when we go into less resilient states, and being able to start figuring out where our triggers are. That'll be coming out in the early part of the new year. And,
amazing.
Yeah. Again, thank you
Amazing.
so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you, and it's been such a great conversation. And all of those links, I'll get them from you, and we can put them in the show notes and stuff like that, so that they're easily accessible to people. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this with people.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.